Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, October 31st, 2025, and today we are going to be talking about the state of Georgia. Happy Halloween, everyone. It's an exciting day. I am up here in Boston, Massachusetts, contemplating whether or not I should go trick-or-treating at Elizabeth Warren's house. Very obviously probably not going to do it, but a couple of my friends are, and it's an exciting time. We are right around election season. I often forget that for, I think, normal people in this country, it is Halloween season they look forward to. I'm really excited for 4 days from now when we go into the Tuesday elections, but of course, as is nature with my channel, we are talking about an election a little bit further away. November 2026, a race out in Georgia, a race that I actually think does terrify Republicans a little bit more than Halloween might. A new poll that is reported in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, a poll that they conducted, shows that Jon Ossoff is, quote, riding high in the state as a MAGA firebrand leads the GOP field. Now, what is this saying? It's a lot of, buzzwords here in the title. What is it actually saying, and what does the data really tell us about the state of the race in Georgia? Well, to begin, it's not great for the Republican Party, and let's unpack why. What we know is that the Georgia field hasn't been great for the GOP for quite some time, as Marjorie Taylor Greene told Bloomberg News that she felt the GOP field was, quote, lackluster. Now, obviously, as someone who has floated with the idea of running for Senate before, she was never really going to be satisfied with those who were running, but she is one of the most steadfast soldiers of Donald Trump, or at least used to be, and was largely seen as someone on the Republican side who had their full allegiances with the party and was willing to back the nominees. And I don't doubt that she will vote for whoever the Republican is in this state, but I do think that you start to see the cracks forming, especially when some of the most loyal members of your party are willing to admit the quiet part out loud, that the GOP field just simply isn't great. And to make matters worse, the GOP party chair in the state of Georgia came out publicly and said that he wants the GOP candidates to stop fighting one another. It didn't seem like he could get to them over text, over a Zoom call, whatever it might be. It seems he took to a very public way at expressing his discontent with the field on the Republican side that has raised millions of dollars only to go against each other in these early stages of the primary. Now, Donald Trump has yet to make a full-throated endorsement in this race. A big reason why we see that is because Congressman Buddy Carter and Congressman Mike Collins, two of which who have associated themselves very heavily with the President of the United States, are both gunning for Donald Trump's endorsement. Now, Governor Brian Kemp of the state of Georgia has already made an endorsement. He has endorsed Derek Dooley, who was the Knoxville, Tennessee, at the University of Tennessee's football coach, is from the state of Georgia, and is being bankrolled by not only his own personal fortune, but by some of the more establishment members of the Republican Party in this state. It's a multi-way primary where the data now suggests that Doug Collins is indeed the favorite on the GOP side. Another reason why Democrats are riding high, and that's because in this state of Georgia, we can't find it here, unfortunately. It is behind a paywall here, but I hope you can sort of get the assumption here. Sometimes they go behind the paywall, but I'm not going to do that. For the sake of this video, you can actually find the poll online if you'd like to. The point is that Jon Ossoff actually finds himself, even amongst Republicans, at about a 20% approval rating in the state of Georgia, an exceptionally high approval rating, and a lot of voters really, really like him. Republicans have no clear direction. That's why we're waiting for Donald Trump to actually make an endorsement in this race, because without it, you really don't find that anyone focuses in on this. Nobody is paying attention. Who's the front runner? I don't know, right? Who is it going to be? We'll have to see. Is anyone happy? No. Right? The GOP party chair says, stop it. Please stop fighting. It's like wrangling children in this case, going around a daycare and saying, stop throwing blocks at one another, right? Well, at the end of the day, this is something that I think is going to be the biggest pitfall for the GOP, which is that oftentimes, before you even get to the general election, they like to eat their own. Now, this isn't to say that a clearing of the field has always been great for the Georgia GOP. I think they often remember that 2022 Senate race in the midterm against Raphael Warnock, where Herschel Walker received an endorsement from Donald Trump before he even announced that he was deciding to run. Very different than this time around, with a whole set of Republicans who really, really want it, and Donald Trump is just kind of okay about it. On the Republican side, Herschel Walker made that announcement, defeated everybody in this election by a huge and substantial amount, got 68% of the vote, and I kid you not, won every single county, and this is a lot of counties in Georgia. Two-thirds of the majority, two-thirds of the state's voting populace is in the Atlanta metro area, but, again, either way, Herschel Walker dominated in this primary. But it didn't necessarily foretell an election that he was going to win. Yeah, Georgia was a state that Biden won by 1/4 percentage point, but Warnock was just undoubtedly the better candidate, and Herschel Walker, Republicans rallying around him, actually did some damage, I think. Really didn't help that he was someone who the GOP really didn't vet well. He had a lot of scandals come out with him later in the election, and just overall didn't really inspire the GOP base in the way that Donald Trump does routinely on the presidential level. And I don't think that many of these Republicans will either. I think what we're finding is that a MAGA firebrand in a midterm election that is going to be the exact opposite of what you want to be. You're going to want to be a more moderate and sensible conservative in 2026, who's seen as more of a middle-of-the-road type, someone who can appeal to those McCain-Romney voters, because even looking at the last presidential election, I think the Republicans in Georgia have gotten quite confident given that Donald Trump won the state. But I think it is often important to remember the incumbent and the ruling party in this country, that Georgia only barely voted for Donald Trump. It's one of the few states where he did not improve off his margin in 2016. In fact, significantly, underperformed it. He won Georgia by a likely margin in 2016. This was down to a 2-point race. And, when you think about the fact that, Georgia was in some cases right on par with the national popular vote, if it's only about 0.4 off, which is roughly what it was, 0.4, 0.5 off from the national popular vote, what happens when the national popular vote swings 6 to 7 points to the left? Well, arguably, Georgia goes 2. And with a strong Democrat who has a wildly high approval rating, given where he should be as a Democrat in a swing state, really goes to show why, riding high probably fits the narrative at this point, because that's just simply where we are. When you take a look at any of the data that has been expressed in this state too, Jon Ossoff isn't losing a singular poll. The most recent Kalshi betting odds show him at a 74% odds at victory, and the only time where we saw that he was even going to lose was when Brian Kemp floated with the idea that he might run for Senate. After he pulled that away, Ossoff became the immediate favorite, and since then, nothing really has changed. In fact, the numbers have only gotten worse for the Republicans since the beginning of the year, when they were at just start date, January 1st, 2025, at about 44% odds at winning. Today, that's roughly a fourth across Georgia. Not a great place to be. And so just thinking generally about, the midterm elections that we are about to embark on, the Democrats do have the upper hand in many of these races, but Georgia is one that I do think just on paper should be far more competitive. But it is the lackluster Republicans and the very strong Democrat that make this race kind of a perfect storm as a state that should, again, be very solid for the GOP. Maybe not solid, but certainly well within reach by many degrees. Even in 2018, in the Democratic wave year, Democrats lost some Senate seats, right? State of Florida, Hillary Clinton only lost Florida by a point. It feels like it must be significantly more, knowing where we are with our current standards in Florida politics, but genuinely speaking, right? Rick Scott beat out Bill Nelson because he ran a better campaign, and Florida wasn't necessarily immune to a Democratic wave. Across Florida in the House elections, Democrats came damn near, winning the majority of the votes in Florida. You'll see 16-11 from 14 to 13. Really, they could have had the majority of seats from Florida if things had gone correctly. That's why the Republicans needed to do this excessive gerrymander, because Democrats had come close at different periods of time. But 2018 is a great example of how, this could have been Georgia in 2026. Republicans could have been able to take that very narrow victory they had in 2024, capitalized on it in 2026 with the right Republican. They ran the strongest one. It was the incumbent governor at the time, who was popular across the state, did well for himself against Bill Nelson in the United States Senate. I mean, Florida really was the real test for Democrats, and they failed it in this race. Obviously, they did well on the national stage. 2018 was still undoubtedly a Democratic wave in the same way 2026 could be, even if they lost Jon Ossoff's seat. But as nature, as a byproduct of having an exceptional Democrat in the race and very bad Republicans. I'm going to go back to this term lackluster that Marjorie Taylor Greene loves to use in reference to her own colleagues in some degree. Looking at it where we are right now, the Georgia GOP field just simply is not conducive to having Republicans win that race. They aren't going to win it, and I think that's going to be, the biggest problem for the GOP when they try to navigate the next year of having a Republican, a MAGA firebrand as their frontrunner, or even if it's not him. I mean, I don't think Dooley is that much better. I don't think Buddy Carter is that much better. I mean, I just don't think this is really a great place to be. I think that they have fielded very, very poor candidates. I think there were much stronger ones before. Now you see Colton Moore, a state senator from Georgia, trying to enter into this race. Rick Allen, who is another U.S. I mean, it is just so tired. It is really, really tired. And I hate to do that because we talk about this all the time. This should be a race that is far more competitive, and it's not going to be. And I think that's really what's going to be, a lot less fun about it which is that, maybe a lot more fun for Democrats who can probably feel more at ease about the race. It's by no means a done deal, by the way. I think that it is important to note that there is still a 1 in 4 chance that Republicans win this race, but in a normal election, it should be about 50-50. And, thinking about what we've seen in terms of the fundraising side, I think this is also a very important piece to note. Buddy Carter, Mike Collins, and Derek Dooley both have raised, all three rather, have raised over $1 million. They've all spent, nearly the same amount. And thinking about what this means for the primary, I mean, absolutely none of them have moved to general election ads. Yes, the Republicans are pouring in tens of millions of dollars against Jon Ossoff at baseline. They're trying to do what these Republicans just simply cannot because they're in this competitive primary. But what we've seen here is that, Mike Collins leading here, Buddy Carter coming in a distant second, and then Derek Dooley in a distant third, is that the fundraising metrics show something a little bit different, but none of them can compare to the amount of money that Jon Ossoff has raised for this race alone, already $54 million in the 2021 race, which was often, regarded as one of the most impressive victories for any Senate Democrat, given that, Jon Ossoff, for most purposes, was largely seen as a sacrificial lamb. I know it feels very weird to see, but when you actually take a look, maybe we can actually find this. The history of the Georgia race here. I want to go back. I don't know why there's so many of this, but let's go ahead and see, 2000, or I guess we're going to have to go back very, very far, back to maybe the early on days of when people were looking at this, not 2021. But rather we're just going to jump all the way to oldest. Maybe we won't, unfortunately, but we'll have to take a look. Let's say May 2020. I think this could be a great time to really engage and look at what the circumstances looked like then, because Ossoff was the declared candidate. He had run for office. He was seen as the investigative journalist, media executive, yada, yada, yada. And we saw Ossoff was leading in the polls. He ended up winning that primary. It was a little bit more competitive, but still, did quite well across the state. Either way, by the time he reached the general election, what were the ratings? Likely and lean Republican. Nobody said he was going to win. He was down in the polls. David Perdue was up 7 points. He was up 2 points. Only a Democratic internal had him doing well. And what we saw there, too, was that these likely and lean characterizations could have nearly written off this entirely for the Democratic Party if they were looking at it this far in advance. But yet, against all the odds, Ossoff outperformed, won this race in a runoff, and did so with $150 million to his name. At this point in time, I don't even think we were tracking fundraising metrics because nobody had raised this amount, but you have to see a candidate, a Democrat, who took this race from being likely for the GOP and made it a toss-up, and then won said toss-up. Now, let's take a look at the ratings. All of them say toss-up or lean D. None of them say lean or likely Republican as they did 6 years ago. And I think that means something. I think that tells us a lot about this race. And when I say 6 years ago, I mean 2019, but also really we saw May 2020. We saw that, COVID had hit. Everyone was in lockdown. People were listening to, Sunday Best, and it was a very different time, right? But honestly speaking, politics was different. Right? Georgia was seen differently. It was seen as a state that maybe Biden could get in the wildest of wildest dreams, but it was going to be Florida that he targeted, Ohio, Iowa. We are in a very different day and age. And it is Jon Ossoff who I think is the right candidate who meets this moment in a way that none of these Republicans really can. And as much as this will be a close race, because it is Georgia, it's a swing state, a 4-point margin is seen as, in regards as a 15-point margin in any other state, because that's how competitive it is and how much money is going to be thrown at this race. I think that what we have found here is, as it stands right now, at least, on Halloween Day in 2025, a race that is quite good for the Democratic Party in a field of many that might not be so good for them in 2026. Democrats are on track to win in Georgia, and it doesn't look like it's going to be that difficult to see why in autopsy. It won't be something that will be, as easily said and done as other races have been in the past. In 2022, Democrats had some pretty easy ones, especially on the gubernatorial level, and this one will be hard fought. I don't want to take that away from Jon Ossoff and his team, but I do think that at the end of the day, the Republicans also are that other major component who do make up this race. And I think that's the advice I've been saying on routine. I think if you watch my videos from 2022, raising that alarm bells about Herschel Walker, when we saw, Christian Walker up on Instagram talking about, first of all, anyone who knows what I'm talking about, that was the craziest, Walker situation. I had no idea they were related. And I think that's just something, knowing them in two very different contexts, the Starbucks UCLA guy screaming at the camera and then Herschel Walker, whatever. Getting back to the point here, when we talked about that 4 years ago, what was the advice? Republicans need to run better candidates. They need better people. If they want to go up against A or S tier Democrats, you're not going to beat them by throwing someone in who maybe Donald Trump likes, who can't even clear the first hurdle, right? That's the big problem here. And many of them are even in this competitive primary because they can't simply break away because even their own party base can't seem to pick who they like best. And so seeing 2026 really form out the same way under a much less positive national environment, I really think takes the cake here. I think it really shows exactly why, this fracturing and what the GOP is obviously trying to avoid. And what Marjorie Taylor Greene, I think, accurately captures that this field is lackluster, they're trying to get rid of because they're not going to win this Senate race as it stands today. And while it won't be a 100% sealed deal, it's getting closer to being that reality. And I think that the Democratic Party a year out already looks in a very strong position in a way that they did not 6 years ago. And I think going into the 2026 cycle, the numbers are likely only going to get better for the Democratic Party. And as it stands right now, Ossoff's approval rating is exceptionally high. He's doing well, and Atlanta Journal-Constitution, amongst many, are the ones to report on this. And we'll have to wait and see how it pans out over the coming months, over the coming year. But as it stands right now, Senator Jon Ossoff is in a good position to win re-election in November of 2026. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the top left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch and then a playlist for my 2026 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.